Hey everybody, welcome back to American Literature. Today's story is probably the most horrific and violent of all the ones we'll cover this semester, and it is James Baldwin's story, Going to Meet the Man. So there are a few things we need to kind of get straight before we really get into the details of the story. You read the little bio of James Baldwin. He's one of the great American writers of the 20th century, an extraordinary speaker, just a really remarkable man. Look up some YouTube videos of him debating William F. Buckley. Look up a YouTube video, William F. Buckley debating James Baldwin, and you'll see what a unbelievable mind this man had. As you read in the biography, he was very interested in race relations, obviously, but also the mingling of sex and violence, and race relations, which frankly is something we still have with us today as an issue, as something culturally a big part of our culture. So very interesting story in that regard. Of course, at the core of the story is a lynching scene, and I always find that some students know more about lynching than other students, depends on who your history teachers have been. But roughly from 1882 to 1968, so 1882 to 1968, there were 4,743 lynchings. 3,446 of those people were black and 1,297 were white. So it was not exclusively white on black violence, but the vast majority was, and that tends to be what we talk about when someone says a lynching. Put quite simply, it's a mob justice, which is your oxymoron for the day, mob justice. It's not anything that goes through courts, law enforcement, the judicial system at all. A mob of people decide to take justice in their hands, and they grab whomever and they kill that person. Now, in the South, this was quite common for some time. From 1882 to 1900, about 100 people a year were lynched. So that's one every 3 days. So that's like Monday somebody's lynched, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday, about every 3 days. And that's a horror. That is just an absolute horror. And white police officers sometimes did traffic control for lynching. These were huge spectacles, just like the one described in here. Hundreds of people would come, they'd get dressed up, they'd bring some food to pass. It looks like a church supper. There's a very famous picture, which maybe I'll insert here, maybe not. It's very disturbing. It's a picture of people out at a lynching, and if you take the dead body hanging from the tree, it looks like a nice picnic with a very large group. But put the dead body in, and it becomes about as dark a moment as you can imagine. So lynching was not uncommon. It was widely accepted. The only thing that finally brought it to an end, we talked about in the 50s and 60s, was international pressure. Other countries were like, what are you people doing in America? You keep allowing mobs of white people to kill black people. And of course, the Emmett Till that we talked about in the poem section really brought it all to an end as well, at least in its open format. Occasionally there's still obviously racially motivated killings, but as far as this sort of mob business, not anymore in our country. So some progress, I guess. Okay, so oftentimes, and it's no different in this story, what a black person would have been accused of doing, almost always a black male, was doing some attack, assault, a slight even against a white woman. So there was this ridiculous fear among white men that the black men were going to come take their women, and it's disgusting. So in here, there's a mention that this guy who gets lynched, the man who bumped old Miss, I think old Miss Standish, Come on. Nothing probably happened. It's something trumped up. So why? Why does it happen? Well, number one, when white people lynch a black person, they are exerting their racial superiority. They're sending a message to black people that you are inferior and you will do as we say. We can't own you legally anymore, but you still have to pick cotton cheap, and you can't have the same rights as us, and you can't sit with us in the movie theater, and you have to ride in the back of the bus, etc. And lynching, as we see here, is without question a teaching tool. Kids, families, the whole family went to this lynching. Jesse, when he was a kid, we'll get back to that. So kids were brought, and the lesson to the young white kids was, look what we can do. We're white, we're superior. So it's really a horrific chapter in American history. So this story, there is a flashback. So the first part of it is set in the I did have this figured out somewhere, is set in the 60s, when Jesse is a sheriff's deputy and he is trying to control a crowd, and he gets their leader. These people are lined up at a courthouse, probably demanding their right to vote or to register to vote. Of course, white people in the South don't want black people voting. To this very day, states like North Carolina set up polling places as far away from black communities as possible. They close roads so that black people make it harder for them to vote. They demand ID, identification, even though there's never been widespread voter fraud, because a black person is less likely to have a photo ID because they've been discriminated against, and etc., etc. So to this day, a lot of people in the South, and it's usually Republicans, because 9 out of 10 black people vote for Democrats, do try to keep black people from voting, and in many ways it's legal. So the story, the first part is set, say, in the 1960s, but there is the flashback in the middle of it is when Jesse was a kid. So the flashback in the middle of it. Now, let me lay this out there for you. This story actually is somewhat optimistic. Go figure. At least when Jesse is an adult, he can't lynch these people. He can beat this guy in the prison cell and get away with it, but he has to worry. He has to worry. There's not the comfort. So, believe it or not, this story does show some progress over time. All right, let's get into some details here. The opening, which a lot of people missed this, I believe I did. Jesse cannot achieve an erection at the beginning here. "What's the matter?" she asked. "I don't know," he said, trying to laugh. "I guess I'm tired." "You've been working too hard," she said. "I keep telling you." "Well, God damn it, woman," he said. "It's not my fault." He tried again. He failed again. So he's been kind of told off earlier in the day, we find out, by the young black man he's beating in the jail. And it's had some effect on him. He's impotent. Of course, by the end of the story, when he remembers the lynching, he's able to have sex with his wife and probably create more little racists. But at the beginning, he's impotent. So that's what's happening at the beginning here. And also mixed in here, he thinks about going and arresting a black prostitute only to force her to have sex with him in the car. So it's this disgusting hatred, yet also sexual attraction to African American women on the part of this white man. And again, that's something that you often see in popular entertainment through the ages. Yeah. Yeah, they hated him. And he thinks fondly of the old days. Everyone felt this black suspicion in many ways, but no one knew how to express it. Men much older than he, who had been responsible for law and order much long ago than he, were now much quieter than they had been. and the tone of their jokes, in a way they could not quite put his finger on, had changed. These men were his models. They had been friends to his father. They had taught him what it meant to be a man. Of course, it's the opposite of being a man, beating people because of their race. He missed the ease of the former years, so he thinks fondly on the good old days when racial violence was much easier to get away with, and the jokes were easier to come by. And again, they had lost forever. Thus, they had lost probably forever their old and easy connection to each other. They were forced to depend on each other more, at the same time to trust each other less. This is the white community. Who could tell when one of them might not betray them for money or for the ease of confession? But no one dared imagine what there might be to confess. They were soldiers fighting a war, but their relationship to each other was that of accomplices in a crime. So it's changed. Finally, the federal government is trying to crack down. Government is trying to step up, and instead of turning a blind eye to lynchings, they're actually trying to stop them. But this, in fact, was not the case when Jesse was a kid, and we have this gruesome scene of an open lynching. And there's also one other little glimmer of hope in this story, and that's Jesse and his friend Otis. And we'll catch up with Otis in the next part here.